African history, the Rwanda Revolution of 1959. The Rwanda Revolution of 1959. Rwanda was a German colony until its involvement in World War I. Germany lost Rwanda in 1919 and it was placed under Belgian mandate. Both Germany and Belgium preferred to work with the Tutsi, who were 14%, to rule over the Hutu majority, who were 85%, and the Twa, who were 1%. In November 1959, the Hutu under Gregory Kayibanda and Juvenal Habyarimana organized an attack against the Belgians and their Tutsi counterparts. Causes of the Rwanda Revolution of 1959. The Rwanda Revolution was caused by social, economic, and political factors as shown below. 1. Politically, the Hutu-Tutsi competition for political authority caused the Rwanda Revolution. During colonial rule in Rwanda, many existing Hutu chiefs were fired and replaced by the Tutsi chiefs. This gave the Tutsi almost total dominance of chiefly functions. By 1959, 43 chiefs out of 55 were Tutsi. 549 sub-chiefs out of 559 were Tutsi. As independence approached, the Hutu began to redefine their political status and rid themselves of Tutsi domination. This resulted into the revolution. 2. The failure of the 1952 elections in Rwanda caused the revolution. The Belgians had announced municipality and council elections scheduled, but they were cancelled, and instead the leaders were appointed, especially among the Tutsi and a few Hutu who were seen to be collaborators. This did not please the Hutu, who were expected to win the elections given their command in numerical strength, thus the revolution. 3. The rejection of the Hutu Manifesto of March 1957 led to the bloody revolution in Rwanda. The Hutu wrote down all their social, economic, and political concerns and forwarded it to the colonial administration for consideration. However, the Belgians, alongside their Tutsi counterparts, rubbished the manifesto and carried out no reforms. This provoked the Hutu, thus causing the revolution. 4. The Belgian sudden change of political support to the newly formed Hutu political party caused the revolution. Towards independence, Belgians switched support and began preparing for a Hutu government. After independence, they started replacing Tutsi chiefs by Hutu chiefs. This generated friction between the Hutu and the Tutsi, which resulted into the revolution. 5. The influence of the UNO, which placed Rwanda under trusteeship council, caused the revolution. The UNO naturally emphasized self-rule and self-determination of the majority. It urged the colonialists to carry out social, political, and economic changes which were not forthcoming in Rwanda. This alarmed the Hutu elites, resulting into the revolution of 1959. 6. The long hatred of the Hutu against colonialism contributed to the Rwanda Revolution. The Hutu had earlier unresisted colonialists like Germany and later the Tutsi during the Nyabingi Rebellion. This therefore gave them the motivation to start the 1959 revolution basing on their resistance. 7. The rise of Hutu nationalists/elites resulted into the revolution. These included Gregory Kayibanda and Juvenal Habyarimana. These demanded for Rwanda's independence, equality. African history, the Rwanda Revolution of 1959. 9. The Gitamara incident/massacre of 1959 was the turning point in the Rwanda Revolution. There was a burning rumour that the Tutsi in the northern town of Gitamara had massacred several Hutu, including the Hutu chief Mbomatwa. This provoked Hutu reaction. They attacked the Tutsi, burned houses, killed and mutilated animals among others, resulting into confused fighting, hence the revolution. 10. The death law of Mwami Mutala Roman III in July 1959 inspired the Hutu to rise up against the Tutsi. King Mutala Roman III, a Tutsi who died in July 1959, had no heir. The Belgians and the Hutu had agreed that this would be an opportunity to transform Rwanda from a monarchy to a republic, but during the burial of the king, the Tutsi forced the Belgian president to declare Mutala's half-brother, Kaidru Roman IV, as the new king of Rwanda. This was unacceptable by the Hutu because it meant that they would never get into power, yet they were the majority. This gave birth to the revolution. 11. The Belgian failure to create ethnic fusion in Rwanda resulted into the revolution. The Belgians embarked on a policy of divide and rule which simply set the Rwandese apart. This made the Tutsi feel very proud and oppressed a majority Hutu. This set the ball rolling for a revolution. 12. The Second World War influenced the Hutu to rise up against their Tutsi oppressors. It enforced the spirit of nationalism under Gregory Kayibanda. It made the Hutu elites to demand for democratic changes in Rwanda from the colonialists. Their failure to respond resulted into the revolution. 13. Economically, the Belgians watched the Hutu being overtaxed by the Tutsi. The poor Hutu were made to pay neck-breaking taxes which even worsened their poverty levels. The Hutu who failed to meet their obligation of paying taxes were subjected to more forced labor, and they were humiliated in public by reckless caning. This provoked the Hutu anger, resulting into the revolution. 14. The Tutsi were used by the Belgians to oppress the Hutu with forced labor. The Hutu were made to work on private and government farms and plantations, public works, for example drainage system, under a very hostile environment. Seeming laziness was punished by public flogging. In many cases, the Hutu women and children suffocated. In 1959, Hutu women experienced miscarriages due to forced labor. This provoked the Hutu to carry out the revolution. 15. Competition for productive land between the pastoral Tutsi and agricultural Hutu caused the revolution in Rwanda. The Tutsi had accumulated vast land using their chiefly position, while the Hutu peasants suffered from severe shortage of land, high rents given to the Tutsi landowners. Therefore, by 1959 the Hutu started seeking means of regaining land ownership, which caused the 1959 uprising. 16. The high levels of unemployment in Rwanda caused a revolution. The Tutsi who had better education were favoured by the colonial authorities and dominated the army and civil service, especially native clerical positions. The Hutu were discriminated and found it hard to access employment suitable for their level of education. Poverty worsened among the Hutu. This made them bitter, thus the revolution. African history, the Rwanda Revolution of 1959. The Tutsi were naturally born chiefs. They had to be given the first priority in education to enhance their colonial control over the elites. This made the illiteracy rate very high among the Hutu. By 1945, out of 45 students enrolled at the University of Bhutan, only 3 were Hutu. This caused discontent, which resulted into the revolution. 19. The outbreak of famine, especially among the Hutu, caused the Rwanda Revolution. By 1959, the Hutu had suffered 6 phases of famine, and this was attributed to lack of land among the agricultural Hutus. It is also true that arrogant Tutsi grazed their cattle in the gardens of the Hutu. This was humiliating to the Hutu majority and resulted into the 1959 revolution. 20. The Tutsi brutalization of Hutu resulted into the 1959 Rwanda Revolution. The Tutsi, for example, grazed their cattle on the gardens of the Hutu plantations/gardens, used the Hutu as domestic servants, and conscripted forced Hutu labor. This caused serious social tension, which exploded in 1959 through a revolution. 21. The influence of the Catholic Church contributed to the outbreak of the Rwanda Revolution. The Archbishop of Rwanda called Peregrine condemned the Tutsi oppression against the Hutu as non-Christian. It was evil and it was condemned by the hellfire. This inspired the Hutu to strengthen their condemnation of the Belgian Tutsi rule, thus giving birth to the Rwanda Revolution in 1959. Reference questions. 1. To what extent did colonial legacy/colonial administration contribute to the outbreak of the 1959 Rwanda Revolution? 2. Colonial administrative policies were mainly responsible for the outbreak of the 1959 Rwanda Revolution. Discuss. Role of colonial legacy. The Belgians supported the monarchical rule of the Tutsi. The Belgians politically oppressed the Hutu and not represented/favoritism of the Tutsi. The Belgians suddenly changed attitude to support the Hutu towards independence. The Belgians rejected the Hutu Manifesto of 1957. The Belgians changed the election structure of 1952. The colonialists introduced the divide and rule policy. The colonial education imbalance/education bias. Forced labor was practiced by the colonialists. Unfair land distribution/land alienation/land grabbing. Employment of the Hutu was blamed on the colonialists. Overtaxation of the Hutu was blamed on the colonialists. Denial of independence Rwanda. Forced growing of cash crops leading to famine. Other factors. Role of the Archbishop Peregrine. The Tutsi cultural arrogance. The role of the Uno. Inspiration from the Nyabingi cult. Ethnicity and Rwanda/tribalism. African history, the Rwanda Revolution of 1959. The impact of World War II. Formation of the Hutu cooperation movement, for example, Trafira. The Tutsi brutalization of the Hutu. The Gidamara incident/massacre of 1959. Economic disparity in Rwanda corruption. 3. The economic factors were primarily responsible for the outbreak of the 1959 Rwanda Revolution. Discuss. 4. Account for the 1959 Rwanda Revolution. 5. Examine the causes and effects of the Rwanda Revolution of 1959. Effects of the Rwanda Revolution. Negative. Tarnished relationship between Rwanda and her neighbours, for example Uganda, Burundi, which provided asylum/refugee to the Tutsi soldiers. Led to the death of several thousands of Tutsi by the Hutu extremists across the country. Created a refugee crisis, for example 22,000 internal refugees in 1964, over 336,000 Tutsi had scattered around the neighbouring states. Worsened Hutu-Tutsi hatred, which caused further Hutu-Tutsi brutalization in December 1963. Led to the formation of the Cockroach Movement in 1963 for the Tutsi based in Burundi and invaded Hutu government, but were badly repelled. Kayibanda's inability to end Hutu-Tutsi tension promoted the 1973 coup by Juvenal Habyarimana. Paved way for the 1990-1994 Rwanda genocide, where the extremist Hutu slaughtered the Tutsi still residing in Rwanda and moderate Hutu. Led to massive suffering of the refugees who fled to African countries, were very harshly treated, and this forced them to embark on the struggle to relocate themselves back to their homeland in 1990. Tutsi Mwami Kyagulanyi IV was overthrown and fled to exile in the United States and only returned home after the success of Rwanda Patriotic Front RPF in 1994. It militarized Rwanda politics as the gun came to dictate affairs in Rwanda. Neo-colonialism set in as France and Belgium struggled to influence affairs in Rwanda. It exposed the weakness of the UNO. It did not rush to Rwanda to bail out the Tutsi who were being subjected to politics of extinction. The Tutsi refugees in areas where they settled, for example in Ntungamo, Mibend, Masaka, Mbarara, Bisoga, and Tiso, among others, were subjected to low-status jobs, for example looked after cattle, digging, unblocked sewerage, and their dignity was undermined. The revolution led to the declaration of state of emergency in Rwanda, leading to restricted movements. The revolution led to loss of property through looting and burning of the Tutsi homes. Positive. African history. The Rwanda Revolution of 1959. The Hutu were able to access education, land, employment and civil service, and other forms of social economic discrimination ended. Resulted into a commission of inquiry championed by the Swiss government, which was the major foreign aid donor. Between December 1963 and January 1964, the Commission of Inquiry released the report called Terrorism in Rwanda, which whitewashed the government's activities during the crisis. The revolution made Rwanda to become a republic in 1961 that laid plans for elections, which brought Kayibanda to power in 1962. The revolution led to taxation reforms in Rwanda, where the methods of collection were very